My name is Corinne Halstead. I am 34 years old. The hospital administrator stood at the foot of my ICU bed with a folder in his hands while a police officer and two hospital security guards waited just outside the glass doors. My older sister, Leora, folded her arms across her expensive blazer and looked at me as though I were the inconvenience. "I'm sorry, Ms. Halstead," the administrator said quietly. "Your sister claims your house has already been legally sold. The buyers are demanding possession today." Leora didn't even look nervous. "You've been unconscious for 8 days, she said, almost casually. "I handled everything. You should be thanking me." The room became strangely quiet. Even the steady beeping of the heart monitor seemed farther away. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for me to break down. Instead, I looked at the folder in the administrator's hands, and realized something that my sister had completely forgotten. She had just sold a house that no longer belonged to me. But to explain why that single mistake would destroy everything she had spent years building, I need to take you back a few months. People always believed Leora was the responsible one. She was polished, charming, and knew exactly what to say to make herself look generous. Family gatherings revolved around her stories, her promotions, and the carefully edited version of her life she presented to everyone else. I was different. I worked as a physical therapist in a rehabilitation clinic. My days were spent helping people learn to walk again after accidents and surgeries. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered to me. After our parents passed away within 3 years of each other, I inherited our childhood home. Not because I was the favorite. Because I had been the one who stayed. While Leora chased promotions across different cities, I drove Mom to chemotherapy appointments. I slept beside Dad in the hospital when his heart began failing. I learned every medication schedule, every insurance form, every doctor's extension by memory. None of that made headlines in our family. It simply became expected. When both funerals were over, everyone praised Leora's emotional speeches. No one remembered who had held our parents' hands during their final nights. I never argued. Grief has a strange way of making silence feel easier than justice. The house wasn't luxurious. It was an older 2-story place with creaky wooden stairs, a wide front porch, and the oak tree Dad planted the year I was born. Every scratch on the walls carried a memory. Every room reminded me that love could exist quietly without needing applause. To me, it wasn't property. It was home. Leora saw something else entirely. She saw land values rising. She saw investment opportunities. She saw numbers. The first time she suggested selling it, I thought she was joking. "You don't need all that space," she smiled over coffee one afternoon. "Think practically, Corinne. Sell it while the market's hot." "I'm not selling. You'll change your mind." It wasn't a conversation. It was a prediction. After that, the comments became more frequent. She sent listings for luxury condos, forwarded articles about real estate prices, even introduced me to agents without asking. Every refusal only seemed to convince her that I simply hadn't been persuaded yet. Looking back now, I realized she had already started treating my answer as temporary. What I didn't know was that someone else had quietly noticed the pressure Leora kept putting on me. That person would eventually give me advice that changed everything. At the time, though, I had no idea how important those words would become. Then, on a cold Thursday evening, my phone rang while I was locking the clinic doors. One unexpected call changed the course of my life before I ever reached home. If you're invested in Corinne's story so far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because the next chapter reveals how one ordinary phone call set a chain of events in motion that Leora never saw coming. The call came from an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail. It had already been a long day at the clinic, and all I wanted was to drive home, microwave whatever was left in the refrigerator, and fall asleep on the couch. But something made me answer. "Ms. Corinne Halstead?" "Yes. My name is Adrian Mercer. I'm a real estate attorney. I apologize for contacting you unexpectedly, but someone called my office this afternoon asking about the legal process for selling your property." I stopped walking. Cars continued pulling out of the parking lot around me, but for a few seconds, it felt as though the entire world had slowed down. "I'm not selling my house," I replied. There was a brief silence. I suspected that might be your answer, he said carefully. The person asking the question seemed unusually interested in whether a sibling could complete the sale without the owner's direct involvement. A chill ran through me. Did they give you a name? I'm afraid attorney-client confidentiality prevents me from answering that. Of course it did. I thanked him anyway and ended the call, but my hands were trembling as I unlocked my car. For the first time, I considered something I had refused to believe. Maybe Leora wasn't simply trying to persuade me anymore. Maybe she was planning around me. That night I barely slept. Every conversation we'd had over the previous year replayed in my head. Every casual question about the house. Every request for copies of insurance papers. Every offer to help organize my finances. At the time, they had sounded like concern. Now they felt like reconnaissance. The following morning, I requested a personal day and drove straight to Adrian Mercer's office. He greeted me with a calm professionalism that immediately put me at ease. I can't tell you who contacted me, he said after we sat down, but I can tell you something else. He slid a folder across the desk. If your property means as much to you as I believe it does, you should make sure nobody can exploit a medical emergency or forged paperwork in the future. What do you recommend? There are several ways to strengthen ownership protections. For nearly an hour, he explained different legal safeguards that most homeowners never thought about until it was too late. As he spoke, I kept remembering how confident Leora always sounded whenever she talked about selling my house. Almost as if she believed it was only a matter of time. When the meeting ended, I made a decision, one that seemed almost unnecessary back then. I updated every ownership record, added additional legal protections, changed emergency authorizations, revoked old permissions I had forgotten even existed after helping our parents manage their affairs. Everything was documented properly. Every signature was witnessed. Every record was filed. When I left Adrian's office that afternoon, I actually laughed at myself. I felt paranoid. I convinced myself I'd overreacted to one strange phone call. Life settled back into its routine. Weeks passed. Then months. Leora eventually stopped mentioning the house altogether. That should have reassured me. Instead, it unsettled me even more. She had never been someone who gave up. Not when she wanted something. Looking back now, I think she simply realized she needed patience instead of pressure. Then winter arrived. One icy evening, as I drove home after finishing late with a patient recovering from spinal surgery, headlights suddenly crossed into my lane. I remember the blinding glare, the sound of twisting metal, glass exploding around me. Then, nothing. The next memory I have is opening my eyes in the intensive care unit 8 days later. Everyone told me I was lucky to be alive. What nobody realized was that those 8 unconscious days had given someone exactly the opportunity she'd been waiting for. And when I finally learned what Leora had done while I couldn't speak for myself, I understood why that phone call from Adrian Mercer had saved far more than my house. It had saved my entire future. The moment I was strong enough to sit upright, the hospital administrator placed the folder in my hands. I think you should see this before anyone else speaks, he said quietly. Leora shifted impatiently beside the window. You don't need to read all of that, she interrupted. I handled everything while you were unconscious. The house is sold. The money is safe. Safe. That word almost made me smile. Not because it comforted me. Because I finally understood just how confident she still was. I opened the first page. There was a purchase agreement. A closing statement. Even copies of signatures that were clearly meant to look like mine. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make everything appear legitimate. The administrator cleared his throat. The buyers have already transferred the funds into escrow. They're threatening legal action because county records don't match the documents they received. Leora frowned. What do you mean they don't match? The administrator looked at her. The property ownership was legally updated several months ago. For the first time since I'd opened my eyes in that hospital room, my sister's expression changed. Only slightly, but I noticed it. So, she asked. So, he continued carefully, the person listed on these sale documents no longer owned the property on the date they were signed. The silence that followed was almost uncomfortable. Leora laughed. A short, nervous laugh. That's impossible. I finally looked directly at her. No, I said softly. It isn't. Her confidence disappeared a little more. You never told me you changed anything. I wasn't required to. She stared at me as though I had somehow betrayed her. I did everything because you were unconscious. No. I kept my voice calm. You did everything because you thought I wouldn't wake up before it was finished. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The administrator quietly stepped toward the door, giving us privacy. Leora lowered her voice. You have no idea how complicated you've made this. I think I understand perfectly. She walked closer to my bed. I've already promised people this sale would happen. I never asked you to promise anyone my home. You weren't thinking clearly. I was thinking clearly enough to protect it. Her jaw tightened. Then she tried a different approach. You've always been emotional about that house. I looked past her toward the window where snow was beginning to fall outside. I buried Mom after promising I'd keep that house in our family. She didn't answer. I buried Dad after making him the same promise. Still nothing. You weren't there for either conversation. That landed harder than I expected. She looked away. For years, I had avoided saying those words, not because they weren't true, because I knew they would hurt. But sometimes the truth hurts because it's been waiting too long to be spoken. The hospital door opened again. This time, Adrian Mercer walked inside carrying another folder. He greeted me with a small nod before turning toward Leora. I'm representing Ms. Halstead regarding all matters involving this property. Leora's face went pale. You hired a lawyer? I almost laughed. No. I hired him months before the accident. He placed certified copies of the ownership changes on the bedside table. Every date. Every signature. Every filing number. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. There is another issue, Adrian said calmly. The attempted sale created a complete paper trail. Leora swallowed. What does that mean? It means investigators now have every document they need to determine exactly who prepared these contracts, who submitted them, and who financially benefited. For the first time in my life, my sister had absolutely nothing to say. She simply stared at the paperwork as if willing it to disappear. I watched her standing there, surrounded by the consequences of choices she'd made one signature at a time, and I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. The fear I'd carried for years, the guilt, the constant need to defend myself, it was gone. Not because I had won, but because the truth no longer needed me to fight for it. It was finally speaking for itself. The legal investigation lasted several months. The buyers recovered every dollar they had paid. The fraudulent documents became evidence. Leora faced consequences that no amount of charm or excuses could erase. As for me, I returned home the following spring. The porch still creaked beneath my feet. The oak tree Dad planted was beginning to grow new leaves. I unlocked the front door and stood quietly in the hallway. For the first time since losing my parents, the house felt peaceful again. It wasn't because the walls had changed. It was because I finally understood that protecting the people you love sometimes also means protecting what they trusted you to keep. And that promise was one I intended to honor for the rest of my life.